good morning everyone in Asia and good morning everyone in Europe. Thank you very much for attending Frost & Sullivan Intelligent Mobility today. My name is Vijay Rao, a mobility consultant in Frost & Sullivan located in Sydney. The theme of this session is Future of Electric Vehicle Architecture Strategies and Importance of Skateboard Approach. I'm going to talk about trend shaping future of electrification in this particular session. These are the 8 trends that are likely to reshape electric mobility in the future. COVID has had very low impact on EV growth due to generous subsidies and incentives provided by different countries to spur EV growth. We are also likely to see new business models emerging, such as infrastructure as service, along with new dedicated EV platform to increase EV volumes in the future. We expect more than 140 plus startups emerging in electric vehicle space this year. There will be new technologies introduced, especially in battery technology, such as solid-state batteries. Finally, electric two-wheeler dominance will continue in APAC, with China emerging as the largest electric two-wheeler market. Passenger cars will occupy the major chunk of EVs sold annually in 2027, with 22 million vehicles, unlike the current scenario where two-wheelers occupy the major share of the electric mobility market. EV favorable taxation policies, credit system, rising charging infrastructure networks globally will drive the passenger car market. Trucks and buses are also expected to see a healthy growth of 33% and 40% respectively. Globally, F&S expects approximately 8 million electric two-wheeler to be sold by 2027, mainly dominated by China. Here we'll discuss about different trends of electric mobility starting from this slide. COVID, as I mentioned, has had very low impact with approximately 2.5 to 2.7 million estimated EV sales growth to be by end of this year. Battery cell production and charging station installations are also having very little impact due to COVID. F&S forecast electric vehicles market to be approximately 3.5 million vehicles in 2021 with over 800,000 charging stations. And over the next 5 years, more than 200 electric vehicles will be introduced, mainly dominated in the SUV segment vehicle market. This slide just shows the total market for APAC for electric vehicles. By end of the 2020, we expect approximately 150 to 120,000 of electric vehicles to be sold in Asia Pacific, of course, excluding China, with South Korea being the largest EV market with 70,000 vehicles dominated by battery electric vehicles, while Japan will be the second largest market with 29,000 vehicles were dominated by plug-in hybrid because of the local OEM push towards plug-in hybrid market. The next trend we'll discuss about the impact on EV incentives on growth of electric vehicle, especially in the European market. Top markets in Europe are driving fiercely by EV purchase incentives and taxation policies. When you look at Germany and France, they have doubled the purchase subsidies to propel the EV sales during this time when traditional automotive sales are down due to COVID-19. Though there were less incentives in Belgium and Denmark, because of EV favorable taxation policies, the market still grew quite a bit in 2020. There was further fueled by the government's announcement to ban of diesel cars in Brussels from 2030, and that was one of the reasons that the EV sales grew in this particular region. The next trend we discuss about is the battery technology, and we are expecting that solid-state battery will start being introduced in electric vehicles from 2025. They have advantages in terms of high power and energy density as compared to other battery technology. Solid Power is partnering with BMW to develop this particular technology. We expect some of the volume OEMs such as Toyota and Volkswagen to introduce these electric vehicles batteries for solid-state batteries by 2025. Samsung A123 Systems, Solid Power, and Fisker have invested in research and development of more than $1 million investment for these solid-state batteries in the coming years. The next big trend we are looking at is the home charging innovation, which is the latest trend in terms of this electric vehicle charging station. Here, I would like to point out 2 important trends in this particular case. One is a network access, which is a web services, where someone like a FedEx which has a fleet of 30 electric vehicles, and the maintenance can be handed over to a company like ABB, which gives a driver and fleet manager a portal or web service where everything from device, driving behavior, charging metrics, battery health can be monitored. Another interesting trend is remote diagnostics. So similarly, ABB can find out what is the fault in the charging station and fix it remotely. And this is enabled by advanced algorithms and also robust communication protocols. Here we discuss about the trend for electric vehicle charging infrastructure in APAC. Of course, this excludes China. So Japan and South Korea have got the highest charging infrastructure, with Japan having more than 29,500 and South Korea having more than 12,000 charging points by 2020. So the Chauji protocol that APAC is continuing, so they will be the first one to introduce in this particular market, and they'll be the first adopters in this standard going forward. One of the future trends in development of dedicated EV platforms and its functionalities. These indigenous EV platforms are inspired by skateboard architecture and are designed essentially not because of e-mobility as a vision, but as an enabler to future autonomous mobility as well. So Volvo, for example, with their SPA platforms, will be completely dedicated to EVs, and they will add on the autonomous ability on top of this particular platform, where they can integrate the power electronics on this particular platform. The drivers, of course, vary for different use cases, such as for B2B delivery business interest, the electric SUV, and for autonomous delivery, the driver is basically cities banning ICE vehicles. So, we see a gap based on our analysis for electric bus and electric trucks platform, where there are different dynamics and use cases for these platforms, and then hence there is an opportunity for the industry to fill this particular gap. The next trend we see as infrastructure as a service business model. So here we have different types of business models that we have looked at. For example, type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Type 1 is typically an OEM business model where Hyundai, for example, in the US, for the end consumer, they can go to Amazon.com and pick from an array of charging stations authorized by Hyundai. They can enter their PIN code and also book authorized charging station installers. In the future, they can also pick the service providers. So type 2 is basically the end-to-end integration of all the infrastructure, including the smart home, providing roaming charging solutions and maintenance of charging. The type 3 is an interesting model in the UK. So Ecotricity is looking at this model where they are installing their charging stations on the highway, and it is tied up with manufacturers like Volkswagen, where you can subscribe to their highway network for a subscription fee. And the type 4 is basically the aggregator app, similarly to what Porsche is doing, where you can buy a Porsche and you can use that subscription around Europe to use the same subscription, and you don't need to subscribe it specifically for each and every country. This slide basically talks about this startup ecosystem and investment in this particular startup ecosystem. So as we can see, there are more than 140 plus startups in this particular electric mobility space, with APAC having more than 25 to 30% of the startups. So this is mainly dominated by electric vehicle manufacturers, followed by charging infrastructure and battery technology. For electric vehicle manufacturers, there's an investment of over $48.2 billion, which is almost 4 times the next highest investment in the battery technology space. So this slide we discuss about which are the main electric vehicle startup companies. So for electric two-wheelers, we look at companies like Gogoro and NIO, especially in Taiwan and China, respectively. For battery manufacturers, we have CATL, which is the #1 electric vehicle battery supplier, supplying globally to every OEM around the world. And also we are looking at other companies like Gogoro, also into the electric vehicle charging station space. So coming to the conclusion and what are the future growth opportunities in terms of this electric mobility services. So as we discussed, in terms of market, we expect more than 25% of global new vehicles in 2025 to be electric, with of course China dominating the market. In terms of battery market, we expect solid state batteries to be introduced by 2025, working along with the lithium ion batteries. We expect the acceleration of new OEM cooperation models, like we look at joint manufacturing, licensing of skateboard platforms. That will be the future of EV platform development. And finally, we will have an opportunity with broader electric vehicle ecosystem products such as charging stations, home energy products, infrastructure as a service, as different products and services to be adopted across electric vehicle value chain. So this will bring the end of my presentation. Thanks everyone for listening, and any questions I'm more than happy to take. Thank you.
Good day. My name is Pras Ganesh, and I am responsible for the corporate planning group within the Toyota's Asian headquarters and also Asia Pacific operations of the Toyota Mobility Foundation. To begin, allow me to thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak on the subject of electrification. It's a topic that is close to my heart, and so allow me to share my thoughts. The topic that was suggested to me in the context of electrification was, who will be the ultimate winner? Battery electric vehicles, BEV, or fuel cell electric vehicles, FCEV? It's a question that we often see in conferences and in the media. The question, as posed in the title, frames this issue as an existential battle between BEVs and FCEVs. But my proposition is, why is there a need to pick a winner? The more I study this issue and engage with stakeholders or study the technology, I believe this is a false narrative. Personally, I'm far more interested in seeking the quickest pathway to decarbonization of mobility. Towards that goal, the answer for me, at least for the next 30 years, which is probably all I can talk about, is by way of a broader portfolio of electrification, which has multiple options: strong hybrid electric vehicles, or HEVs, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, or PHEVs, and BEVs, and of course, FCEVs. The reason I say so is because if people are really honest on this issue, there is no singular electrified technology that is perfectly appropriate for all markets in the coming decades. We need to consider the strengths and the challenges of each of them and determine what is suitable for the country and at the time of deployment. In this chart, I evaluate the advantages of all the electrified technologies from a government and customer viewpoint when looked at from the scope of the vehicle. Governments are typically concerned about advancing the technology in their country and the environmental impact. BEVs and FCEVs are perceived to have the more advanced technology and seen to be better from a fuel efficiency or emissions viewpoint from a tank-to-wheel perspective. Most customers, and I'm not talking about early adopters or the wealthy, are more practical about the use of technology. They're more likely to first consider the initial cost. Then they are often concerned with range anxiety or charge time. This means that they often prefer technologies with no or minimal behavioral change, such as HEVs and PHEVs. Of course, I'm sure someone from a BEV-only company may have some different interpretations of the evaluation, but I hope you can understand that no one technology is universally perfect. Let me further explain my thinking on how we should address the issue of decarbonization in mobility. If we think broadly about the elements of carbon emissions in mobility, simplistically, we need to consider this as a formula between A, vehicular CO2 emissions, and B, total distance driven. Vehicular CO2 emissions is a factor of CO2 emissions on a well-to-wheel basis. Hence, the key elements here are the energy source and the policy of each country and vehicular emissions of each vehicle. On the other hand, total distance driven depends on the number and type of vehicles and also the distance driven by each of them. Let me talk a bit more about these. When talking about vehicle CO2 emissions, I would like to explain a bit more about the significance of understanding it from a well-to-wheel perspective. A Thai government research center examined Thailand's well-to-wheel scenario in 2016. Here for the study, they used an index of 1 for internal combustion engine, or ICE, as a baseline. In 2016, up to 84% of the energy generation mix of Thailand was natural gas and coal, emitting much CO2 in the production process. Hence, though there's zero tank-to-wheel emissions, BEVs still give an index of 0.57 for well-to-tank. Based on the Thailand Power Development Plan, even in 2036, this index only improves slightly, as Thailand will continue to remain highly dependent on coal and natural gas. On the other hand, when HEVs are used with ethanol blend, which is a form of flexi fuel that is commonly available, this achieves the lowest index for well-to-wheel emissions. This proves that the energy policy is key to determine the most carbon-friendly alternative. Interestingly, in the same study, an efficient ICE with the use of alternative fuels was also proven to be more carbon-friendly than a BEV. So we cannot afford to skirt the problem by conveniently ignoring well-to-tank emissions especially in many countries in Asia, which still depend on fossil fuels for power generation. When looking at total distance, we have to consider the number and type of vehicles on the road and the total distance driven per vehicle. Here we need to identify the technology that can support mass deployment rather than a niche market. Hence, we need to consider all the UIO on the road. Till 2030, a BNEF study still sees strong market preference for ICE vehicles, followed by HEV. Similarly, readiness for charging infrastructure for the rest of the world, which includes Asia, lags behind Europe and China. This directly impacts the distance that can be traveled on BEVs or Fcvs. Furthermore, we need to also actively consider the expansion of effective forms of public transport and shared mobility. And interestingly, we must also know that by enhancing systems like work from home, which is far more prevalent after COVID, or the increasingly ubiquitous e-commerce with last mile delivery, we change behavior to reduce total carbon footprint. Hence, we need to consider electrification from the lens of why do people move and how will people and goods move in the future? But I digress. I remember that the question that was asked to me was the future of BEVs versus Fcvs. Fundamentally, we see both growing significantly. BEVs with renewables are very good for personal mobility within the city, or for 2 or 3 wheelers, or for short distance fleet, and for customers opting for luxury vehicles. We see very quick uptake for bikes and 3 wheelers because of the shorter and lighter usage patterns and the ease of battery swapping or home charging. On the other hand, as green or blue hydrogen through electrolysis or CCS, carbon capture and storage, starts getting more prevalent, we believe FCV is perfect for heavy duty, long distance travel, and for big goods and passenger fleet, where refueling should be quick and range should be long. It's also good for taxi-like fleets and luxury vehicles. However, the biggest issue for both powertrains at present is cost and infrastructure. Battery costs are coming down, but the degree and speed with which they can be reduced without new technological advancements are in debate. Hydrogen costs are also coming down as renewable costs reduce, but are still expensive. So the critical issue is that of subsidy and infrastructure and the challenge of supporting both technologies by governments. But actually, many countries are already doing so by considering different usage cases for different technologies. Subsidies to customers should ideally be similar for BEVs and FCVs, and infrastructure can be developed through the business model of each. Tapping into the ecosystem, including peripheral services such as leasing, fleet, rideshare, used car, or reuse of batteries, opens up new business opportunities. For FCV, a very important factor to be considered is that hydrogen has usages beyond transportation. The Hydrogen Council outlines 7 roles for the economy, including storage and industrial heating. And that's the reason we are seeing some growing enthusiasm for hydrogen by governments and investors as well. Sitting in Asia, I believe it's critical for us to consider electrification in our context and each country's national objectives. We should know that without mobility, social and economic development is negatively affected. So we need to encourage efficient and sustainable mobility. However, we know that even prior to COVID, most Asian countries did not have significant funds to subsidize electrification heavily. Furthermore, the citizens cannot afford these vehicles and cannot think about the eventual total cost of ownership. As I showed on my previous slide, most Asian countries still do not even have extremely well-developed public transport networks for the size of their population. Furthermore, many Asian countries have young, growing populations with severe mobility and employment needs. So we need to encourage environmentally friendly technologies that enable Asian governments to create scale now, thereby bringing down cost and supporting economic development. That's the reason that all stakeholders should have the courage to focus on the end goal, which is how to move to low carbon mobility quickly and be technology agnostic in the journey to get there. One effective approach we have seen is the usage of CO2-based taxation, which naturally leads to a steady and continuous reduction of CO2. In Europe, 24 countries have already implemented CO2-based tax, and Thailand is one of the leading countries in Asia to have the CO2 taxation. And CO2 reduction has varied from 4 to 37% across segments within a 3-year period. By sufficiently creating a level playing field, the direction should be to incentivize customers to take up all of these types of electrification at speed. Since all base technologies are the same, with the core components of transaxle, battery, inverter, all xEV costs will come down, and that can help customers consider this as a practical and ethical choice. Furthermore, with scale, this approach will also support the urgent need of maintaining and even expanding manufacturing of these core components in many Asian markets. In conclusion, my take is that there is no single winner between BEVs and FCVs, at least for the next 30 years. If stakeholders can focus on the end goals and create the positive conditions to allow the market to move towards decarbonization, I believe that all countries will move to electrification, separated by some differences in timing and share of powertrain. So let's not waste time on this debate to find division, but allow movement towards mass electrification in a technology neutral manner and at the earliest possible opportunity. Thank you and stay safe.
Good evening. Thank you for this great opportunity. I'm Kazuhiro Doi, in charge of Nissan Research Center. So today, I would like to talk about beyond mobility. That is the preparation for the future society. The key is how we could integrate mobility and energy to enhance the quality of life with sustainable business manner. The first, let me try to grasp the automobile market today. So this chart shows the relationship between population of major market and the number of owned cars. It is obvious that United States is the highest in terms of ownership per 1,000 people. China, in the middle of this chart, is the largest market today, and the ownership level is still growing. Traditionally, car OEMs have developed a market to boost that volume. So now, if I change the view like this, you can see the different landscape. So gray area, owners, and blue area, non-owners. Now, let's imagine the future when all non-owners wish to enjoy the life with car like United States. It means all blue areas turn to gray. I think that it's not likely to happen and not a preferable direction for the future. Society and the car OEMs have started the countermeasures to realize a better quality of life with considering the condition today. For society, holistic urban development and the policy like road pricing will be considered widely. In terms of energy, that we have to shift from tank to oil to well to oil and the LCA, life cycle assessment, including production process. And the car OEMs shift R&D investment to electrification and the vehicle intelligence, like autonomous driving. So let's see some more detail of mobility today. So mobility issues are very local. So urban and the rural areas are different. For example, approximately 2.8 million people commute to Tokyo every day from surrounding prefectures. As a result, city function and spaces become constrained. In the rural areas, on the other hand, public transportation is abolished due to the population decline. So as you see in the chart right-hand side, the closed railways is increasing and the railway network is reducing. The bottom chart shows the situation in Hokkaido area, that northern part of Japan. So you clearly see the difference between the 1983 to 2013. So such kind of negative spiral is in the reality some area of Japan. So today, many of rural towns run the transportation by government subsidies and the sustainability is a headache. Then the question is how we can improve the efficiency and the profit model for transportation. So one of the ideas is to improve it by mobility and energy. So please look at the chart for right-hand side. So today, the many of the transportation in countryside is run by the government subsidies actually. But so suppose if we start a mobility service, handles people and goods at the same time, we can improve the business efficiency. So suppose the driverless vehicle start to run, we can improve also the business efficiency without drivers. And the reborn EV, like a second life battery, reduce the initial price of EV to start a business. And the smart community with EV integrated with renewable energy can improve energy efficiency. So there is no single solutions to solve all the issues, all complicated issues. But we will realize it by leveraging efficient mobility service and energy usage. For the future mobility, Nissan and our partner DNA conducted a field test of robo vehicle in Yokohama, one of the largest cities in Japan. So please watch the short movie about our test. The customers orders their car through the mobile and are identified by the QR code. And when push the button, car automatically start, and all the situation is monitored by the centers. And now that you can see some customers, they are real customers. So they are really enjoying and satisfying with the future mobility. So it's still the test conditions. So, and unfortunately, it's not the unmanned vehicle. It's still the safety drivers sitting on the driver's seat. But actually the car is running without any input from drivers. So of course, today we are conducting the FOT in Yokohama, center of the city, but it's possible to expand the same idea to the countryside. Then, in terms of the electrification, the key is how we develop solid base of EV. So EV is still expensive due to the battery cost, mainly. ASSB, all solid-state battery, is expected as a game changer to reach the total cost of ownership of EV similar to ICE engine, internal combustion engine level. So from the society point of view, the energy from EV can be integrated into the grid. It can be used for demand and supply adjustment and enjoy cheaper tariff during the night. Also, the battery from used EV can be reused for various purposes according to deterioration. In other words, the batteries has a values even after the end of life of EV. The value for long life battery will increase. In Japan, the ministries launched a new project so-called Smart Mobility Challenge. The main purpose is to solve transport issues and activate regions. Currently, 52 regions were selected for the field test, and the Nissan contribute to one of the towns, Namie-cho in Fukushima Prefecture. Namie-cho is a small town, still on the recovery way from the latest earthquake, from the last earthquake and tsunami. As I mentioned today, Nissan will take holistic approach, mobility and energy, to realize sustainable society and enhance QOL, quality of life. So we will develop the real world solutions. So multitask and role mobility service, including goods delivery, autonomous vehicle as a hub and spoke unmanned type mobility service, and energy integration of electric vehicle, reuse battery and VGI. So city vision is always the priority, although we keep thinking what and how we can contribute. So we Nissan are always welcome to dialogue with you to create for the future. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel on acceleration of electrification and autonomous driving. Today, we're speaking to 4 panelists, a number of which just presented, so feel free to ask questions about those presentations that you just watched. To ask a question, click on the Q&A chat section to the right of your screen, and don't forget to mention who your question is for. Today, we've heard insightful presentations from Pras Ganesh of Toyota Daihatsu Engineering and Manufacturing, Kazuhiro Doi of Nissan Motor, as well as Vijay Rao of Frost & Sullivan. We're also joined by Giuseppe Bornolo of Pininfarina. All right, guys, let's start with a question for all the panelists. Let's hear first from Giuseppe, then Pras, Kazuhiro, and Vijay. The question is, from our understanding and research, COVID has had little impact on the EV market growth so far. How do you see EV sales panning out in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Georgia, for the question, and good morning or good evening to everyone. Very interesting question. We have at Pininfarina not much doubt, I would say, about the answer. The answer is no negative impact. We should say the opposite. At Pininfarina, as a design house, we are in a sort of a point of advantage in observing the market trends, because we are a design house, but with a strong engineering background, and we have a global organization with design studios in Italy, in our headquarters, but also in China and in North America. And the outcome of our continuous activities with customers says that there is, at the opposite, a sort of acceleration on the market trend in favor of electric vehicles. Basically for, I would say, 3 reasons. The first one is that, in broader sense, the pandemic has brought an increased public awareness about environmental sustainable solutions. So people are now more attentive to what will bring a better impact into the environment, and electric vehicles are there. Second reason, it is more and more important, not only the design of the vehicle, but the design of the user experience overall, including the relationship between the vehicles and the infrastructures, including the new way of living the interiors of a passenger vehicle or a people mover, just to comply with the so-called new normality. So this is bringing attention to these aspects of design, and there is a good room for doing something newer, something fresher, something innovative for the future. And electric vehicles are probably really the best opportunity for doing that. The third aspect, just to finish, is that there is a sort of extension in mobility to all the aspects of electric mobility, not only passenger cars, but also the so-called micro-mobility. Last mile solutions, they are getting more and more electrical. And I'm talking about e-mopeds or e-scooters and so on. So it is being perceived more and more as a need by the public to have families of solutions for electric mobility that goes beyond passengers' cars. And again, we are experiencing that because we are actively engaged in different design programs for customers worldwide.
Great. Anything to add to that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to speak on this particular subject. I think, as was kind of explained in my broader talk, fundamentally, we think that the move to electrification is going to speed up, including looking at COVID. We think that there will be a global trend where electrification is going to actually rise. This is based on various factors. Of course, the factors related to climate change, which is obviously the critical issue, but also in terms of technology that has actually been developed and also performance that now can be delivered through electrification. So from that perspective, we do see it moving, but we should probably differentiate it in some degree of nuance. I think we need to look at it from also luxury vehicles. We need to look at it from fleet. We need to look at it from a mass vehicle perspective as well. And we will see, especially in terms of luxury and in terms of fleet, a quicker acceleration towards electrification. In terms of mass mobility, there will still be some elements in terms of needs for changing. Finally, it has to be the customer who actually is the person who selects it. So both in terms of usage pattern, convenience, as well as price. And these are some of the issues that still need to be looked at. So if we're looking at a 5-year time period, I think we need to look at it maybe in phases depending on the category of the vehicle. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, let me add one word. Maybe it is a little bit too early to say, we have a direct impact for the EV sales from the COVID-19. But clearly, that people are, trying to get more kind of well-being. So, and in that sense, the direction is exactly the same. Yeah, to live in clean. So, in that sense, we are in line for that future direction. And also, the EV is kind of the vehicle which can respond to the unexpected thing. For example, in Japan, sometimes we have a big earthquake or disaster or typhoon, and Nissan provide a Nissan Leaf as for the electric generators for the local, sustainability in such a kind of case. So all in all, so the EV is a good direction towards that kind of future. So even though we cannot say something very clear about the impact of the COVID-19.
Yeah. Thanks, Doi-san. I agree with most of the panelists here because based on our research, before COVID, we expected the market to be around 2.5 to 2.7 million vehicles. But even post-COVID, we are still standing with the same forecast based on the current sales scenario that we are seeing. A couple of things are working for growth of sales. One is, of course, the incentives by European countries, but I don't know how long it will last. So the next 5 years will be very tricky in terms of sale. But the most thing that is really happening is a lot of countries are banning the sales of ICE vehicles. Even in UK, recently they announced they're planning to ban ICE by 2030. So there are a lot of things working for electric vehicles at this point of time. So as everyone mentioned in the panel, we do see a growth of electric vehicles going forward, and that will be a key in the future. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we've got a bunch of questions from the audience. I'll start with one from Udipta Pal, who asks, Southeast Asia has a high potential for electric two-wheelers. What are the plans for OEMs in this area? Let's start first with Kazuhiro, go to Vijay, Pras, and then Giuseppe.
Yeah, because Nissan are not working for the two-wheelers, so that's why it is difficult to answer that question. But from the viewpoint of the car OEMs, the two-wheeler is part of the partners which can share the electricity or the battery. So the future, number of the battery will be increased more and more. And in that situation, for the car OEMs, one of the expectations is to reduce the cost, but also as for the another side, you have to be very careful about the natural resources. So on top of that, so so in that sense, the two-wheelers and the vehicle are different categories, but probably we have to work together or discuss together, how we can make the sustainable society.
Yeah, thanks, Aisan. So that's a very interesting question because we expect electric two-wheeler to be the biggest market in APAC. So if you also include China for that matter. But if you exclude China, I think in ASEAN region, Indonesia will be the biggest, actually is the biggest two-wheeler market. So we expect some electrification happening in Indonesia because of this. So we see a lot of innovative business models with respect to electric two-wheelers. We have so many startups. I think when we look at Gogoro in Taiwan, one of the very great startups which is doing a lot of volumes, and also the business model like the battery swapping and subscription model. Everything is working towards electric two-wheelers, and I think ASEAN will be a big market compared to passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles. I think electric two-wheeler will be the first one to be a starting point in electrification in our region, followed by the passenger and commercial vehicles.
Thank you. So maybe my comment will be very similar to Doi-san's comment, because we are also probably in a similar situation. But as a fundamental perspective, I have kind of 4 things that I'd just like to very briefly mention. The first thing is two-wheelers are easier to electrify, just in terms of the fact that for battery swapping or direct charging, these things become easier. So the growth of two-wheeler in terms of electric mobility is something that we will definitely see growing, as we will see with three-wheelers as well. So this trend will take off. The second thing is that as we see more sharing, especially bike sharing, or we see delivery, food delivery, these kind of things growing even during COVID, and it's becoming part of the new normal, I think you will start seeing also the business models between electrified mobility and sharing coming together. So we do see that happening. The third element is, again, this is similar to what Doi-san mentioned, which is fundamentally, of course, some of the parts are the same. So in terms of building scale, for the battery, especially the battery sector, this is something that car and bike makers need to work together, especially towards the big battery players, and source the batteries from them. And the fourth thing is that finally we need to look at mobility as an ecosystem. So even when it comes to integrating cars as well as bikes, for example, if you have a subscription of mobility, probably you can use shared cars or shared bikes. These kind of systems will start getting integrated into the broader ecosystem of mobility. So I think that's where we see for bikes. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we've got another question. Would EV and AV necessarily converge? What role will new platform strategy play in this? Let's start with Giuseppe and then go to Pras, Kazuhiro, and Vijay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Georgia, for another very interesting question. Yes, we see some sort of convergence, basically for 2 reasons. The first one is that electric vehicles, they do approach the market as the latest expression of technology. So they do have to embed ADAS systems. It's a sort of must-have. Of course, with the graduality and the modularity, which will fit with the positioning of the vehicle, positioning in terms of geographical market, in terms of market segment, and so on. Not all vehicles, of course, or not all brands are the same. So there is some sort of differentiation in that. But in principle, that happens. And second reason, because I didn't mention that when talking about trends in electrification, there is still a trend in terms of startup companies that are entering into the car market. And by definition, with different, solutions, it may be passenger cars, it may be people movers. And by definition, when entering into the market right now with an electric skateboard, they have to embed also the most advanced technologies related to driving assistance. So it's a sort, again, of must-have. And this, at the end, just to complete my answer, produces new requirements for approaching and designing a user experience, either for the driver or for the passengers in a private vehicle, or for the passengers in a public vehicle for transportation. So this is being reflected in our observation in the need for introducing new solutions at the digital level, either physical or digital design. We do cover the two aspects, and we see the two aspects growing together and mutually, let's say, shaping new experiences in the market.
So this question is probably, at least sitting in Asia, where I am, we don't see the immediate convergence between autonomous mobility and electrification. We think electrification is something that will move faster than within, at least in the territory that I cover, which is ASEAN or India, Pakistan, these areas where still the technology for autonomous is far more expensive. So if there is going to be some level of autonomy, we do believe that naturally the electrification, kind of the technology total element of integrating all of the technology together, is something that we are likely to see. But again, within the Asian context, we still see this is a bit far away. So I'd like to kind of just keep it to that. Thank you.
Okay, from the technology maturity point of view, we still need to wait. But the combination of the EV and the autonomous driving is a kind of the perfect combinations. And maybe from now on, the integration between the two and or more technologies are the kind of a key. It's something like a similar idea of the smart city. The smart city is the idea of the integration of the smart economy, smart government, smart people, and by combining through the data. So in case of the vehicle, it's same. So maybe the EV and the AV will be integrated through the data on the platform and to provide a new type of the service. So, and for the autonomous driving viewpoint, EV is very, useful or the easy to control the vehicle. And also from the EV viewpoint, kind of the mobility service planning is better for the usage because of the charging. So we can set up the charging, or we can plan the charging to make the best efficiency. So, and all in all, the combination is very good. And now, for example, in my presentation, I show the field operation test in Yokohama. That is a combination of the electric vehicle and autonomous driving.
Yeah. So to conclude, I completely agree with Doi-san. So I make a bold statement here saying that in the future, all autonomous vehicles will be electric. So from a technology perspective, for autonomous vehicles, you need a very high architecture in terms of electric architecture. You at least need 240 to 50 volts. So the normal IC engine with a 12-volt wiring harness will not be able to provide or communicate so much with so many sensors, radars, cameras, processing unit and stuff. So that is why we always mention that there will definitely be a convergence happening. Of course, as Pras rightly mentioned, electric vehicle will be the first one that has taken off, and it will be the first one, especially in our region, in ASEAN, APAC. But globally, it will converge in the future. We are looking at post 2025, 2030 for this trend to happen. But definitely we see the convergence happening at this point of time. Thank you.
And let me add just one thing. So both of the AV and the EV is a good combination, but we have to be very, very careful because both of the technology are very complicated. So then how we can secure the quality and the safety, that's going to be the key in the end.
That is really interesting. These have been really insightful comments. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have. Thank you so much to our panelists for your insight, and thank you to our audience for your many questions. We'll try to compile them all and answer them after the event. Please also answer the poll questions that will appear on the next screen, and don't forget to provide feedback on the panel discussion in the feedback section to your right. Next up, we have Theme 5, Digital Retailing in the Automotive Industry after the break. Thank you.